Do you believe you found the skeleton? How would you tell it's a dinosaur? You personally, how would you decide?
Well, interesting question. I don't know. I'd have to do some research on that.
Hey everybody, welcome to Dapper Reacts 85. So lonely. So called because I do not currently have a guest. So it's just me today. So if you were hoping for an awesome guest, sorry, I don't have one. But I do have a Dapper's a Professional drink, so let's take one quick drink for that. And yeah, I definitely scheduled this for the time slot for the next Kent with Bent, and then only noticed that like 4 minutes before I went live. So, oops. Yeah. Star Song for $5 says, Godzilla first drink trigger, I hope, smiley, or AIG is a bag of balance. Well, that'll be the second drink trigger, but that's okay. So, let's see. Roshna Gently Used Keller for $4.99 says, you're not alone, Dapper Dinosaur, you'll always have us parasocial stands. Thank you. I do appreciate that. So, yeah. Alright, well, so, for those of you who are new, Dapper Reacts is basically my live show where I take a look at, usually, but not always, young Earth creationist nonsense. We do a little drinking game. However, I do not normally explain all the rules on Saturdays. I explain them on Tuesdays. So, if you are new, if I say there's a drink trigger, feel free to treat it as a drink trigger. You'll figure it out. I'll call out the types of drink triggers, generally speaking. So, yeah. If you do decide to play along with any booze or any other intoxicating substance, please be careful, know your limits. Do not consume to excess. If you do consume an intoxicating substance, don't go out there and drive a car, drive a train, fly an airplane, operate heavy machinery, text your ex. Just be safe out there. So, we are taking a look at Pete Greer. Now, Pete Greer is not a famous guy. He doesn't work for a big creationist organization. There are two reasons I look at Pete Greer. I guess three. One is he actually does do creationist content, so, I mean, that's kind of a almost prerequisite. Two, he's basically just an elder at a church. And so I look at Pete Greer as sort of like what is being taught to creationists who aren't like following, Answers News, or who aren't getting the Creation Science Quarterly delivered to their homes, who aren't always going on like the AIG or creation.com website or something like that, who are just living their lives, but they happen to go to a Young Earth Creationist church, and so they hear Young Earth Creationist stuff in church, and they just kind of accept it. And so Pete is where they're getting that kind of thing from, at least for his church. And so that's one of the reasons I like to take a look at him, is because what are the actual average Young Earth Creationists in the pews getting? Because they're not always getting the direct, right from the source answers in Genesis. And the third reason is because, well, Pete's not that far from me. So Pete lives in Payson, Arizona, and I live in the Tucson area. And while they're not terribly close within Arizona, I have been to Payson. I liked Payson well enough. It's up in the Highlands. And yeah, it's reasonably close to me. Well, for U.S. distances, right? I recognize that if, I were to say that this place is reasonably close to me and you live in, the U.K., you would find this to be an extremely absurd idea that this is a close by. But that's because, look, distances in the United States are different. If you get into a car in the United States and you have to travel 3 miles, that's it's not that bad. All right, 3 hours. I didn't mean 3 hours. Or 3 miles. But yeah, so Savage Vampire Pterosaur Cobra for $1.99 says AIG is prodigiously pernicious. Sorry, I think there should be a AIG is a prodigiously pernicious pack of pizzles. Yeah, we'll take a drink for that. AIG is indeed a bag of dicks. All right, so Pete Greer has been telling us about how badly reconstructed various hominins are, because his talk today is about human evolution and what, all those dastardly scientists are lying to you about, I guess, kind of. So he has basically already done what we call a ad hominid argument, which is basically he is ignoring the fact that the species Australopithecus afarensis is not solely represented by the single specimen Lucy, and is trying to complain that we can't know what Australopithecus afarensis was like because we don't have certain parts of Lucy's skeleton. But at the same time, in this same talk, he has already acknowledged that we have hundreds of other individual Australopithecus afarensis finds that can inform us about their anatomy, and yet he is still using the missing parts of Lucy as a way to complain about reconstructions of Australopithecus afarensis in general, which is really dumb. It's a really dumb thing to do, and I came to the conclusion last week that he's probably lying, but it's also possible he's actually just that dumb. I don't actually know, right? But he's definitely someone who is evoking the triangle meme, and if you remember, feel free to send some triangle emojis. All right, so that's probably enough preamble out of there. So let's get on with Pete. Now, do be aware, if this is your first time with this particular video, Pete is clipping his audio kind of badly. So I'm sorry, you're just going to have to deal with that. He's still comprehensible, but yeah, his audio quality is absolutely terrible. As to modular equals 666 Ryu for 199 says AIG is a UFO, unidentified phallic sick object. Yeah, we'll take a drink for that. I like that. By the way, I'm drinking an amber ale today. So I really like amber ales. I don't know what it is, but I do. So I know a lot of people don't agree with me on that, and that's okay. We don't have to have the same taste in beer.
Just like an ape's. Locking wrists for knuckle walking. Everything lines up.
Yeah, so this is a reference to the fact that Australopithecus afarensis has some features of the wrist that are associated with knuckle walking in chimpanzees and bonobos. And so then the question is, okay, well then was she a knuckle walker? And the answer is no. And the way that we know this is we have the proportions. So if you're a human, I want you to think about what it would take for you to stand with your feet flat on the ground and for you to make a fist and for your knuckles to hit the ground while your feet stay flat on the ground. Think about what your spine would have to do. And the reason that your spine would have to go down like that, right? The highest part of your spine would be right at your hips, and then your spine would just dip down. And basically, in order to look forward, you'd have to crane your neck up more than just 90 degrees, right? The reason for that is the proportion of your limbs. It's because your arms are much shorter than your legs as a human. And that precludes you from being a knuckle walker. Well, the thing is, we also know that that's true for Australopithecus afarensis. And while proportionally, most, pre-human hominids did have longer arms than humans do proportionally compared to their legs, they were still too short to do quadrupedal knuckle walking while keeping the spine roughly going up from the hip to the head. And so for Lucy to walk on her knuckles, she would have to have her spine bending down. And that's not a realistic option. And so we do happen to know that she couldn't have done that. So then there is the question, well, why does she have these apparent adaptations to knuckle walking? And it seems like the answer is probably just that they're vestiges of a previous mode of locomotion that involved a need to lock the wrists. It's not actually obvious that that's knuckle walking, because it's not clear that knuckle walking was actually present in the ancestor of chimpanzees and hominins. So maybe, maybe not. But yeah, the fact is that while, yes, there are some associated features of her wrist that are seen in chimpanzees and are used for knuckle walking, that could not have facilitated her in knuckle walking, because her proportions are just wrong. She would have had her head lower than her hips if she tried to knuckle walk, which is not a viable option. Maybe in the circus or something that might work, but not for day-to-day life living on, the plains of Africa. Nitro Indigo for £5 with their first super chat, thank you very much, says, I think AIG's Lucy is the worst paleo art piece ever because it was made to deceive people. Yeah, no, I agree. It's frustrating because on the one hand, the technology that they use in their creation museum is really cool, right? Like, they have these holographic panels that if you look at the skeleton you look at the reconstruction and then you look through the holographic panel, you see a 3D image of the bones, superimposed at the location of where the bones would be in the body, but still on top so you can see them. It's a weird thing, but it's very, very cool technology. And it's something I wish a lot more museums would do, right? Is make these cool reconstructions, but with this holographic display technology, so you can see the bones that are actually part of the skeleton in there. Unfortunately, of course, they lie about it. That's the problem, right? They lie about the shape and size of Lucy's bones. They lie about whether or not she could have been quadrupedal. And I don't actually know enough to know whether or not they actually lie about the shape of her hip as it was found in the ground. but they definitely lie that that shape could have represented the life condition. So that's actually one of the most common things you hear from creationists is they had to reform Lucy's pelvis, but when they actually found it, it looked like a chimp's. First, it didn't. It wasn't nearly big enough or deep enough along, like, you know, the anterior-posterior axis to be a chimpanzee pelvis or much like one. But the other thing is that if you try to actually use that as a life condition, the pubic symphysis, where the pubic bones come together at the front, would have just been hanging open, which is not a situation that you can then use that hip to support weight, right? That's going to shift around, and you're not going to be able to support your weight on that kind of a hip. In fact, human females have a situation where sometimes their pubic symphysis comes apart, and it happens during childbirth. So basically, AIG is trying to pretend that Lucy was in the same condition as human females are while giving birth for her entire life. Which, I mean, I haven't given birth to a tiny little baby human, but I imagine some of my audience are, and if you have done that, let me know whether or not you would like to live your entire life currently giving birth. Let me know. I'd be curious to hear that. All right, so here's more P.
Hips at the angle for being a knuckle walker.
Hey, that's just what we were talking about. So I'm going to call that a confirmed prediction and take a drink for that. So yeah, they were at an angle that is more consistent with chimpanzee feet or walking than with human walking. But again, that was because the pelvis was visibly crushed. Like, there were visible, like, lines where the pelvis had been broken into pieces. And then later, the same cementing agent that turned the sediment that Lucy was buried in from the bottom of the lake into rock also cemented those pieces of the pelvis together. Roshan, a gently used Skeletal for $4.99, says, it's almost like young Earth creationists think every single body part has to change simultaneously for something to be a transitional fossil. Yeah, they do seem to think that. Or they seem to act like it, at least. Dr. Dino says, hola, amigo. I found me out here. Hope you're well. Wait, I found a me out here. Sorry. Hope you're well. I am well. Oh, and interesting. You'll have to let me know more about your dinosaur find out there. Savage Vampire Pterosaur Cobra for $4.99 says, Copsilasmosaurus reconstruction is a better reconstruction than AIG's Lucy. Is that the one where he put the head at the end of the tail? I think that's that one. I think that's what the Copsilasmosaurus, where basically he had the head on back, just completely backwards. So I just lost my train of thought. Oh, right, the hip, right. So in order to get the hip to actually conform to a chimpanzee-like style of locomotion, you would have to, one, ignore the fact that the pubic symphysis doesn't come together at the front, which again would basically be like giving birth for your entire life, which is not a situation that's going to be like sustainable. No animal is going to be like a human giving birth for its entire life in terms of its hip configuration. It's not an option. And then also you would actually just need extra bone, because one of the things about chimpanzees is if you look at it at certain angles, yeah, it looks a whole lot like the original angle of Lucy's pelvis. But when you look at other angles, you realize that there's actually a whole lot more bone. A chimpanzee pelvis is just proportionally bigger than either Lucy or a human pelvis. And so if you don't just create bone out of thin air, and you can rearrange the hips so that the pubic symphysis actually comes to a point at the middle, you know, like all pubic symphyses do in nature, with like a few maybe exceptions in some weird animals, but like happens in like every mammal, yeah, you're gonna get a human-like configuration. So when Pete says this, I don't think he thinks he's lying. I think he believes what he's been told by creationists. And what he's been told was that the reconstruction was inappropriate. But it fundamentally wasn't, because the condition it was found in is literally impossible.
And so what? But the museums, guess what? They still have this. And they present Lucy with a thought frozen in time in the St. Louis Museum.
You know, the weird thing about that whole like a frozen in thought is I've seen some very pensive looking chimpanzees and bonobos and gorillas and orangutans. It's not that weird for like an ape to be thinking, right, of any kind. It's not just humans who sit around and ponder things as apes. Now, granted, my guess is that your average chimpanzee is thinking about different things than your average human when it's pondering, but they still ponder. So yeah, I don't know.
Well, this professor, Dr. David Menton, who is a creationist.
Rest in peace, but yes, he was.
It says this statue is a complete misrepresentation, and I believe they know it's a misrepresentation.
But the thing is, it's not. There's literally not. So this statue is a relatively famous one if online. If you like just type in like Lucy Australopithecus and do a Google image search, let's see how long it takes to get to that image. So Lucy Australopithecus, typing that in there, go to images, and let's see. Is it this one? Is it the first image? You don't get to see her. But yeah, I think it is actually, no, the second image that shows up is the Smithsonian one, which I think is that one. Yeah, I think it is. I think it's the first reconstruction that shows up when you type in Australia, like Lucy Australopithecus. At least on my account. Your account might be different, so I guess I can't say for certain. But yeah, it's a very famous reconstruction of, and there's literally nothing about it that's a lie. There are certainly things that are speculative, like exactly how much hair did Lucy have, exactly what color were her eyes, things like that. Those are obviously going to be speculative, but that's always going to be true. There's not an option where you just know everything about the soft tissue of a fossil organism that's only preserved as a skeleton.
They have no plans to, and I like this, knuckle under to the pressure to make it authentic.
That's because it is authentic. I'm going to take a drink, because this is very stupid. We're going to talk about it. Okay, so occasionally, creationists will send letters or complaints or whatever to a museum, asking that the museum conform their displays to the creationists' erroneous ideas. And generally what happens is that in an effort to avoid any kind of ongoing conflict or letter writing campaign, the museum will say, no, we can't for some mostly bullshit reason. Like, oh, we don't have the budget to make Lucy a knuckle walker. We had to pay so much for this reconstruction. Yeah, we just can't. And it's basically just a way to get you to go away. Because it's not the job of a museum director or curator or anything like that to, like, coddle young Earth creationists. Nor is it really their responsibility to get into some kind of, like, be the target of some kind of, like, harassment campaign or something. And while I don't think most young Earth creationists would do a harassment campaign, I've also seen the aftermath of things like the Bill Ludlow debate with Ken Hovind, in which Ken Hovind fans tried to shut down his business via false trademark claims. Yeah. So, like, it happens. Creationists do harassment campaigns. And so, yeah. Sometimes museum directors or curators of various exhibits and collections will receive letters from creationists like, oh, hey, how come you didn't, how come you're showing horse evolution when it's been debunked, even though it hasn't? Or why are you showing Lucy as upright walking, even though we know she was knuckle walker, which she wasn't? And then they just write back, yeah, we don't have time, or we don't have money, or whatever. And that's one of the things I think he's thinking. Rochna, gently used Keller for $4.99 says, AIG's Lucy, quote, reconstruction doesn't use replica bones with clay or another substance over them to mimic skin, does it? I actually don't know what's under the, like, the skin and fur layer. I presume that there's some kind, there must be some kind of hard surface under there to keep it rigid and so it maintains its shape. But I don't know if it actually involves bones. It might just be like a foam sculpture on a wire skeleton. If I had to guess, that's what I would guess it is. I know that most of their reconstructions at the Ark Encounter are a wire skeleton with foam and then like a latex skin or a faux fur skin draped over it with glass eyes and plastic teeth. And I know that because I've seen, like, behind the scenes stuff where they were working on the skeleton, not the skeleton, sorry, the reconstructions for the Ark Encounter. So I would hazard to guess that that's also the case for Lucy. That Lucy is a wire skeleton with a foam around it, and then draped in fake fur and some latex skin. But I actually don't know for certain. But it's an interesting question. I don't know. Asta Moba Mobular 666, equals 666 Ryu for $4.99 says, here's the thing, speculation and imagination is cringe whenever it doesn't align with my speculation and imagination. Young Earth creations. Yeah, exactly. If the speculation isn't what I think is most plausible, then it's bad speculation. Yeah, sorry, that's not how paleo art works. Although I will say, speaking of speculation and reconstructions, with very few exceptions, I will say that the reconstructions of in the Ark Encounter are actually really, really good. Like, very high quality. And the only real complaints I have for most of them is that some of them have, like, the wrong integument. Like, all their pterosaurs are naked and all their dinosaurs are naked, which is not appropriate. But as long as you are, like, just looking at, like, the where the muscles are, the proportions, the stance, they're all excellent reconstructions that I think most museums would be very proud to have. And it's just sad that they're such good reconstructions are sitting in just a monument to lies. And it's really depressing to me. Which is, it's similarly depressing that the Creation Museum has one of the most complete Allosaurus skeletons that has ever been found. They call it Ebenezer, the Allosaurus, and it's just sitting there, being unexamined, not being open to paleontological investigation, because it was dug up on private land that was owned by a creationist group or a creationist family or something. And yeah, Ancestors in Genesis is the owner of one of the best specimens of Allosaurus fragilis that has ever been found, and it's sad.
The curator says we cannot be updating every exhibit based on every new piece of evidence. We look at the overall exhibit and the impression it creates, and we think the overall impression this exhibit creates is correct.
I mean, it certainly is, and I've yet to hear any creationist actually successfully point out something in that particular reconstruction that is objectionable. They've successfully pointed out that some things are speculative, and I'll agree, some things are speculative. But actually objectionable, I've yet to see one of them successfully do that.
How does he know that? If they found the bones and they don't look like that, why would you keep it in there?
Because they did find the bones and they do look like that. That's the thing. I'm going to take a drink. Now, granted, are all those bones that they're using to inform this reconstruction actually Lucy's bones? No, of course not. But there are other Australopithecus bones. Roshina gently used Skeletal for $4.99 says, all dinosaurs should wear pants to cover their naughty pants. I mean, the Vatican did that with a lot of the paintings that were done in like St. Peter's Basilica and whatnot. And there was a whole lot of, let's paint pants over all these crotches. It's not okay. And then later on, they were scraped off when they decided to be a little bit less prudish. But if a dinosaur wears pants, like, do the pants actually come with a sock for the tail? Or does the tail get its own hole? And does the waistband go around horizontally or, like, vertically? How does it work? Explain to me how the dinosaur pants work.
Thousands upon thousands of school kids walk past this every year in this museum.
Yeah.
Well, the legs also are not ape-like, by the way.
I mean, they are ape-like. Those are ape legs. It is impossible to get legs that are more ape-like than those legs. There's absolutely nothing about those legs that is in any way un-ape-like. Because fundamentally, humans are apes. Savage Vampire Pterosaur Cobra for $4.99 says, at least AIG didn't dissolve over their Allosaurus. There's an OVE in here. I'm not sure what word was meant there. At least AIG didn't dissolve their Allosaurus in acid. I'm just going to ignore the word. That bar is under the bottom of the cola borehole. Yeah. So in case you guys don't know what that's a reference to, there was a presumable Acrocanthosaurus Acrocanthosaurus find at the Glen Rose Formation outside of Glen Rose, Texas, and it was on public land. However, somehow, one of the first people to get wind of it was Carl Baugh, and so he got together a church group to go excavate the dinosaur. And in the process, not only did they trample over numerous very fragile small bone fragments, just turning them into dust. At one point, Carl Baugh himself showed up at the quote-unquote dig site with barrels of muriatic acid, claiming that he was going to, quote, burn the bones out of the ground. And so, yeah, he destroyed that skeleton. He and his compatriots, which is in fact a federal crime, although I don't think anyone's ever going to get in trouble for it. And yeah, he destroyed what could have been the most complete Acrocanthosaurus ever found, because early reports of it indicated that it was an extremely complete find. And so, yeah, he and his church group trampled on it and dissolved it in acid. And in case you're wondering, muriatic acid is stomach acid, same chemical, and when you buy it in concentrated form, it can dissolve concrete. So, yeah. Utskaya says, why no domination meter? I missed the start. Literally, the only reason is because I didn't put it up. There's no particular reason. I might put it up at the break. I just forgot to. And because it's not necessary, I don't like consider it like a Dapper as a professional. But like, if people like the donation meter, I can put it up. The Adventures of Secret Museum Agents writer for $5 says, there once was a hobbit named Bilbo who was quite a sneaky young fellow. To keep him away, hit like today, and don't be an AIG, that's a no-no. Yes, I agree. Please do make sure that you don't invite Bilbo. You don't want to get Bilboed. Alright, here we go.
A very human leg. If you shaved it, you would think it was a human leg.
Right, but human legs are ape legs, so that doesn't matter.
Okay, so the purpose of this display, is, Dr. David Menton says, is for indoctrination into the evolutionary mindset.
Just drink it.
So in the Creation Museum, there in Kentucky, they have Lucy, including the bones that have been found more recently, and they've made a hologram of the bones. They've put it into a knuckle walking type animal that we think Lucy was, and that's the height of Lucy, by the way. Lucy wasn't anywhere near a normal human's height.
Now, that part's true, so we'll take a drink. Lucy was probably only about, like, 3.5 feet tall. But, so one of the things they've done here is that they've separated out the different portions of the long bones. So, Lucy was found with basically all of her long bones split at some point. Which is pretty common. It's very rare that you actually get long bones, especially ones that are that small, that are actually completely intact. But the problem is that we have other Australopithecus long bones for the arms, and we know that their reconstruction is inappropriately spacing the bones out. So, they're lying, because we have all other Australopithecus afarensis finds, and we know that those arms are too long. We know it for a fact. We also know that the position of her hips is impossible, and yet AIG decided to just kind of go with it. We also know that her big toes were in line, because we have other Australopithecus feet that have been preserved, and they have inline toes. We also have tracks that do not match human locomotion, that do not match chimp locomotion, and that have inline big toes from the same layers as other Australopithecus finds. So if creationists want to go with, those were just pygmy humans or something, well, first they're going to actually have to find the human skeletons associated with that layer in order to make that claim. Otherwise, there's no evidence of modern humans anywhere at that time. And also, yeah, they're just lying. Now, with the face and the fur, are those things wrong? I can't say. It is entirely plausible that Lucy was just that furry, and that her face didn't have like a human-like nose, and that her skin tone was more like that of an adult chimpanzee than that of an adult human. I don't know how to say which of those is more accurate. Now, I do know that the reason that the Smithsonian is emphasizing the more human-like traits in that area is to encourage people to think about Lucy as part of human ancestry. And that the reason that the Creation Museum is going a different direction with those traits is to de-emphasize any human-like traits. And neither of them are wrong, right? I don't know how furry Lucy was. I don't know what color her eyes were. I don't know what color her skin was. I don't know any of those things. And so any plausible reconstruction is fine in those areas. Which means that as far as that goes, I can't correct the Creation Museum. I can, however, correct their inaccuracies over the skeleton. They are just lying about the skeleton. Roshina, ooh, Keller, 199 says, what's the projection on indoctrination? Yeah, I mean, it is indeed, like, just so much indoctrination. Yeah, it really is. Which is unfortunate. But it's, like, I feel like projection is like one of the key traits that is required if you're going to be a creationist. There's a reason that I was going to make one of my emojis a projector until I realized that there was already a projector emoji, and so that was kind of pointless. Star Song for $10. Sorry. Off there. Dissolving a historic find in stomach acid is a despicable act, even if not against the law. For your information, hydrochloric acid or muriatic acid is produced in your stomach for digestion. Yes, that is correct. And yes, it is. It is. So Carl Boss occasionally tells that story. He doesn't tell it in much detail, obviously, you had to go looking for the detail, but we have eyewitness accounts from both, at least I think we have some from his actual, like, his church members, but I know we have some from independent observers who heard about this and came to see what was going on. And it's honestly hard for me not to get angry when I hear what Carl Baugh did to what could have been one of the most important Acrocanthosaurus finds ever. I mean, Acrocanthosaurus is not a well-known taxon. We do not have that many specimens of it. It is an early Cretaceous North American dinosaur it's a Carcharodontosaur, which was the dominant group of theropods in North America until after, like, Tyrannosaurus came over from China. And, like, it's a big deal. It's a very important taxon to our understanding of, like, the paleoecology and the paleofauna of early Cretaceous southern North America. And yeah, what could have been a very important find is now just trampled and dissolved in acid. For no reason. And illegally. And it's just like, I'm going to stop talking about it now because I'm getting angry now. Let's for $5 says, how many screens are in the multiplex theater this guy's building? Just scores and scores of screens just for his projection. Yeah.
And so that's the way they depicted Lucy. Well, let's see what else, other ways it was depicted here in a minute. We found.
I mean, only one of those is a depiction of Lucy. One's a guy holding what looks to be like a seabed monkey or a New World monkey, and one is a gorilla. Neither of which are Lucy, because I don't even think that Answers in Genesis is arguing that Lucy was literally a gorilla. Or even a chimpanzee, for that matter. I'm pretty sure they think that she was her own kind of ape.
It used to be said that we were 3% different from the apes.
In alignable coding regions, yes. That remains roughly true.
Showing that we must have descended from them.
No, it's not the... Okay, I'm going to take a drink, because this is actually requires some discussion. And this is a very stupid thing for him to say. Okay, so it's not the flat number that matters in this context. It's that the prediction is that humans evolved as apes, right? They evolved from within the great ape group, Hominidae, as the family. Or if you're using older text, you might see it references Pongidae, which is now an invalid taxon, but whatever, you still see it occasionally in older works. And so, what that would mean is that humans should be closest genetically to some member of the hominid family. And it happens to be the case that humans are most closely related to chimpanzees and bonobos, who are more closely related to each other than they are to humans, which makes them together the sister group to humans among extant apes. And so the important thing is that humans be closer to those than to anything else, because that is the prediction of evolution. We don't actually get just from common ancestry, without doing a whole lot more work, the actual number that should be attached to that. But it's still the case that as long as you use consistent and reliable techniques for doing genome comparisons, then no matter what part of the genome you're looking at, as long as you're looking at a significant portion of it, humans fall out as more closely related to chimpanzees and bonobos than to gorillas, and more related to gorillas than to orangutans, and more related to orangutans than to gibbons, and more related to gibbons than to any other kind of old world monkey, and more related to old world monkeys than to new world monkeys, and more related to new world monkeys than to wet-nosed primates, and more related to wet-nosed primates than to colugos, and more related to colugos than to, rabbits and rodents, and more related to them than to any other mammals. That's the important thing. The exact number doesn't actually matter to that conclusion, and it is going to be a confirmed prediction of evolution, no matter what the actual numbers are, as long as the other relations also increase or decrease with new estimates in a similar manner. So, for instance, if someone found out tomorrow that actually, instead of 3% differences in alignable coding regions, which is what that estimate is, if humans were actually only, or say, 5% different in alignable coding regions to chimpanzees, but then also, 8% difference with gorillas, and 10% with orangutans, and 12% with gibbons, and 14% with, not, I was going to say bonobos, baboons, that's it. 14% with baboons, and then 16% with New World monkeys, and then 18% with lemurs. That would still match all of the predictions. So it's not just a flat number, it's the degree of relatedness to other organisms. And also when he says 3% difference with with apes, what he really is talking about is chimpanzees, and it's a little bit less than that. I don't really care, because the exact number isn't really what's important. Neurondiplets for $2 says, "We Are Creation is dumb." Okay, hold on. "We Are Creation is dumb percent similar to chimps." Thank you.
Well, that's what my biology book said when I was at the high school. But what my biology book did not say was that's 90 million differences in the DNA.
Okay.
For many different traits, and that the mutational rate for that to happen would have to be so fast, even given the evolutionary time scale, that it's impossible to happen. It couldn't have happened.
Well, first, I'm curious as to how he's getting that number. So let's grab a calculator. Let's see what we can do here. So the human genome is about 3 gigabase pairs. So that's about 3 billion. Okay. So I'm going to multiply that by, let's see, 0.03. See if that gets us the number he's looking at. Yeah, 90 million. Okay. So here's the problem with that. We already know that that number is off because that percentage similarity is of a restricted portion of the genome. So let's knock that off by about 10%. So we're gonna multiply by 0.1. Okay, that's a much more reasonable number. It's about 9 million. Now, of course, the problem is that that's a divergence that's going in two different directions, because the chimpanzee pan lineage are developing divergences just as much as the humans are. So it's actually only about half of that. So we divide that by 2. We get 4,500,000. Okay. And now the divergence time is about 6 million-ish years. So we'll divide that by 6 million. And we get that every year in one lineage or the other, you need 0.75 on average fixations. Which, because they can happen in multiple parts of the genome at once, and they don't have to be in sequence, it's actually not that crazy a number. It's kind of routine, actually. Yeah, now if you're looking at one particular point in the genome, it's not likely to accumulate that many mutations per year that actually stick around in the population and reach fixation. But when you're accounting for like the entirety of the portion of the genome that was sequenced to compare between chimpanzees and humans, 0.75 per annum on average is not that crazy, especially because these fixations do not have to happen serially. They can happen in parallel lines. So yeah, it's not really that big of a difference. Yeah. The only way to actually come to this number is to, one, misunderstand what those genetic comparisons are doing, and then two, forget that both lineages are evolving and humans didn't just evolve from chimpanzees. And then three, you have to just not understand how fixation works. Yeah, that mutation rate is perfectly reasonable. It's actually the long-term replacement rate, but whatever, it's still perfectly reasonable. And then Fitz, a reptile, eggs crumble like raisins rage, has gifted a membership that went to Katina Pack Days. So let's take a drink. Thank you very much. All right, here we go.
And so we now know that the Y chromosome is 30% different.
So, kind of. The Y chromosome is weird. The Y chromosome in humans is actually much more similar structurally to the Y chromosome in other great apes besides chimpanzees and bonobos. Which means that chimpanzees and bonobos are actually the odd man out when it comes to Y chromosome structure. And by structure, what I mean is what parts of the chromosome come where different genes are located, where various repeats are located, things like that. And so, there's a question. Why are chimps weird when it comes to their Y chromosome? And it turns out that the answer is probably because of sperm competition. The social arrangement of chimpanzees still involves a dominant male who has more or less exclusive breeding rights within the troop. But, unlike with gorillas, non-dominant chimpanzee males are much more likely to engage in surreptitious mating, and so sperm competition is actually a fairly dominant aspect of driving male chimpanzee evolution. So, What that means is that their Y chromosome is under some significant selection pressure. Oh, I missed yours. Oh, I did. Roshna Uwu Keller for 199 says lemurs are just funny-looking rodents. No, I would not make that claim. But actually, rodents and lagomorphs together are their sister group to the group consisting of primates plus colugos, which is one of the reasons why rodents and lagomorphs are really, really good proxies in laboratory settings for humans. So, like, when you're testing out, like, new medications and stuff, that's why rabbits and mice and gerbils and whatnot can be really good proxies. Not as good as other primates, right? But it's like a first step. And if it's really, 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 really bad for the primates and the lagomorphs, it's probably not going to be a whole lot better for humans. So you just don't bother. So, yeah, chimpanzees and bonobos also have very different Y chromosomes, points out Laserpen. Yeah, and that's, again, because of differences in the social structure. So chimps have really weird chromosomes in terms of their structure. But if, rather than checking the structure, you actually check the genome sequences within the substructures of the Y chromosome, then yes, in fact, chimpanzees and bonobos have the most similar Y chromosomes, and then humans are the next closest to that group. And so in terms of genome sequence within that substructure, humans still come closer to chimpanzees than they do to gorillas or to orangutans. And so what's actually going on is that you're seeing the effects of very rapid evolution of the chimp Y chromosome.
So multiply times 10. We also know that chimps, if you want to take chimps, have one more pair of chromosomes than humans do.
All other apes do.
And in the most recent creation.
Oh, but you know what? He said something that's true, so we'll take a drink for it.
Answers magazine, that as one of the scientists has taken that chromosome that they say broke off from the human chromosomes, and he's analyzed that, and he's proven that that did not happen scientifically.
Well, first of all, no, he hasn't. But no creationist has ever managed to even come close to challenging the consensus. And also, one of the things that's weird about this, right, is that generally speaking, creationists do not see chromosomal number differences as reasons to say that two organisms cannot be related genetically and with common descent. Arthur Ams, who's been a member for 13 months and is at the amniote level, says, when creationists lie, do they not break the 9th commandment or 8th for Catholics? And how is their sin justified? Is this for the greater good? Yeah, I suspect that they justify it to themselves as saying that they are saving souls or helping souls stay saved or something like that, depending on whether or not they're into like the whole once saved, always saved thing. And that for that reason, it is worth it. I can't think of another reason for that. But yeah, it is. Well, so it's breaking it in the generalized way in which that commandment is usually taken. You could argue that do not bear false witness against your neighbor is a more legalistic thing, and it's talking about like, hey, don't perjure yourself in order to convict your neighbor in like a courtroom setting. You could make that argument, I suppose. Most people don't. Most people see it as just a general prohibition against lying. But just like the general prohibition against killing is usually interpreted by Christians as a prohibition against murder, and not just any kind of killing of anything at any time, which I do think is a reasonable interpretation. I don't think that the Bible was there telling people to never, ever kill anything ever. They generally extend that to just being lying in general. But then again, they also generally have exceptions. Like if you ask most Christians, like, is lying wrong? They'll say yes. And you say, okay, would it be wrong to lie to someone in order to save a human life? And they'll say no. And then if you go further and you take their mindset that people could be damned to all eternity or saved for all eternity based on their answer to certain questions, then lying to them in order to get them to answer that question correctly, seems like an extension of the whole "it's okay to lie to save someone's life" idea. Now, I doubt that very many of them think that deeply about it, but I think if you force them to, that's the conclusion they would come to. So, yeah. All right, here we go.
Using observational evidence and what we know about genetics. So get the latest Answers magazine and check that out.
Sure, if you want to. I mean, I've read Answers magazine. It's just lots of this nonsense. Although it's more technical, so I guess if you like that. Vagrant Vagabond of Variant Vista says, well, according to Bodhi from AIG, it's wrong to lie to Nazis to save a Jew. Really? I would be interested to hear him say that, because that is not normally what I hear from Christians. So if you could send me like a link to that, where he said that, whether it was an article or a video or whatever, that would be interesting to me. Because yeah, there are Christians who take the hardline stance that it's never okay to lie, but from my experience, it's a pretty small minority. Asta Mobular equals 666 Ryu for $4.99 says, I personally think the ninth commandment is about don't lie to harm someone. Creationists think they are saving people from anti-theistic science, so yeah, I would tend to agree. I think you and I are roughly on the same page on that.
Dr. David Menton made a DVD called 3 Ways to Make an Ape-Man.
Okay. Oh, goodness. Okay, 3 Ways to Make an Ape-Man. That was a presentation David Menton gave at the Creation Museum owned by Answers in Genesis. And I have a video series responding directly to it. That is a video in which David Menton lies demonstrably on stage with skull replicas where you can watch him lie. Where he says, look, here's a difference between humans and apes. And he puts his hand on different parts of the ape versus the human skull and notes that they're differently shaped. And then calls that a difference because they should be the same shape, even though they're different parts of the skull. Look, David Menton has died. However, I am not someone who thinks it is never appropriate to speak ill of the dead. I am someone who is much a bigger fan of speaking truthfully about the dead. David Menton was a liar. He was almost certainly a moron when it came to anything other than direct human anatomy, which he was admittedly probably pretty good. But he was a confirmable liar who died almost certainly of COVID while working for an anti-vax organization. So I have very little sympathy for him, nor do I feel like I need to pull my punches for the simple fact that he's no longer here to defend himself. Because, you know what, I made those accusations while he was alive. It's not like he defended himself against them either. And they'd be pretty hard to defend against. Because he's clearly not too stupid. He has a doctorate degree in human anatomy. His medical degree. He taught human anatomy at a real school for years. He's not an idiot. He's a liar, or was a liar. Ubu Keller for $1.99 says, 3 ways with ape-men? Hey, if that's what you're into, then I mean, as long as everyone is consenting. Fearmonger, Master of Science for... Oh, sorry, this is just a tag. Says, did Menton actually publish any actual science? I don't know. His doctorate was a medical degree, and so that does not require you generally to publish like new stuff on some kind of ongoing basis. Many doctors never publish anything. So I don't actually know if he published anything outside of like fake journals, like the Answers Research Journal. I do believe he published things in there, but I don't count that, right? That's like publishing on your blog. That doesn't mean anything. Well, it means something, but it doesn't mean the same thing as publishing in a real peer-reviewed journal. I don't want to say that it doesn't mean anything. You are still putting your views and your ideas out there. So it's something, but it's not publishing in a peer-reviewed location. So, yeah, I don't know of any peer-reviewed publications he had. That doesn't mean he didn't have any. I want to make that clear. I have not looked for them. I just don't know that he has, and it wouldn't surprise me if he hadn't. Nor would I consider that to be a big knock against him, per se. So.
The 3 ways are, first of all, you take parts of an ape and a human and you combine them together.
That's literally never happened. Usually the only group of hominins that are accused of being a chimerical combination of human and ape bones is Homo habilis, and it's almost entirely on the basis of one site in the Olduvai Gorge. Joshua Geese just gifted 5 Dapper Dinosaur memberships. Thank you so much for your generosity. Let's take 5 drinks. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. The problem is that the bones of Homo habilis, which is the only hominin I'm aware of creationists actually specifically making this claim about, are themselves individually transitional. Like, you can have a femur, or a humerus, or a radius, or a cranium, or whatever, and each of those bones themselves are individually a combination within that single bone of basal ape characteristics and derived hominin characteristics. And so it's not like Homo habilis was an ape skull attached to a human femur, attached to a ape, I don't know, tibia, attached to a human fibula. It's not what was happening. The individual bones themselves were mosaics. And further, there have been studies done to determine exactly how many individuals there were in the various Olduvai finds, as well as which bones went with exactly which individuals to make sure. And the way this was done was you actually took the articular surface of the different sides of a joint, right? Like, take your elbow. You'll notice that on one side, you've got your humerus, and on the other side, you've got your radius and ulna, right? Well, there is an interface between the two sides of your elbow where two different bones meet and there's cartilage between them. However, as you go through your life, you are going to have a unique shape to those bones that no one else is going to have. And the two sides of that articular area in between are going to wear on the bones and exert pressures on the bones based on their shape. And it's going to be unique. And so the faces of the articular surfaces are going to be congruous. They're going to have the same basic shape. One's going to be like a negative of the other. And the only way for that to actually be exact within a very small margin of error is for the bones to actually come from the same individual. Not just from the same species, the same individual. And so that has been checked with Homo habilis finds. And we have found that what we are presenting as single Homo habilis specimens are in fact single individuals, and all of the bones associated with them actually come from that individual, because we can tell based on their articular surface that they're from the same individual. So the argument that these are chimeras that are combining human and ape bones is just completely precluded by the evidence, unless the chimeras were like growing up as living chimeras. So the only option left to us really is that like maybe there was like a Homo erectus Victor Frankenstein sewing together Australopithecus and Homo erectus parts and then bringing them to life so that they could live for decades as weird Frankenstein monster or Homo habilis conglomerations. Maybe that could work, except not really, because that still doesn't explain why each individual bone is on its own transitional and a mosaic of derived and basal features. So even that doesn't work. So yeah, no, this is not a thing that has ever happened. And David Menton was cribbing from John Sanford and Christopher Roop's book, Contested Bones. And that section might be the single section that convinces me the most that this was not simply a bad effort at refuting human evolution. It was, in fact, a bad faith effort. But also a bad effort. It was a bad faith effort. So, yeah.
You take a human skeleton and you downscale it to make it look more like an ape, and you take an ape skeleton and you upgrade it to look like a human.
What? Okay, hold on. I'm taking a drink. So, does he think that paleoanthropologists have like a Honey I Shrank the Kids machine that can just shrink human bones and blow up the size of non-human bone? What is happening? How does he think this works? Because when you describe a fossil specimen, by the way, I'm pouring my second beer here, you don't just make stuff up. Like, you actually have to have a physical specimen that can be measured, that other people can check on. And if you just say that, like, oh, this cranium is actually, like, 75% smaller than it actually is, someone's just going to come behind you and measure the cranium. What? How does he think this works? Literally, the only thing I can think of that could make that work is if the scientists literally had the machine from Honey I Shrank the Kids with Rick Moranis, one of Canada's finest exports, Rick Moranis. How? How does it? How? This isn't like 3D software where you can just type like S to scale and then type a number and it will just scale that mesh by whatever value. That's not how paleontology works. I am extremely baffled by that claim of his. Wow. Oh, they have the miniaturizer from the Wildcrats, says Cadence Linker. I guess I'm showing my age by referencing Honey I Shrank the Kids. Tesla Ranger says Moreau, not Frankenstein. Well, was Moreau... Okay, so it's been a while since I've read the Island of Dr. Moreau. Was Moreau stitching things together, or was he genetically engineering? Because I guess then that could work, right? Because if the Homo habilis is supposed to be, or is intermediate, then that would correspond better to Dr. Moreau with his weird, like, genetic type tampering. Whereas if it's actually a chimera, then that would work better with the Victor Frankenstein, because he was literally stitching different parts of different organisms together. In his case, they were all human, but, like, it's still a chimera, because those weren't all originally part of the same organism. Those bones and muscles and whatnot didn't grow together. So yeah, I guess it depends on exactly what we mean by human and ape combinations. So yeah, maybe it's a little bit of both.
So here's some of the depictions that we have.
I love that guy's eyes. He looks like he is ready to nope out of whatever situation is going on there. I'm sorry, those are just great eyes. Oh, I don't know where that reconstruction is. I don't even know if it's actually Australopithecus afarensis. I just love it. It's like, wait, am I in a creationist video? I do not want to be here. Roshna Uwu Keller for $1.99 says, if you can scale decay rates, you can scale apes. You know what? Fair point. Fair point. All right, we're going to get a little bit more of this in, then I'm going to go grab myself a fresh cold beer for standby. All right.
Have of Lucy's kind. In most cases, there's a couple exceptions in here. But one thing that I'd like for you to notice is the whites of the eyes. The ape kind, you can't see. When they're looking straight at you, you don't see this big whites of the eyes that you see in humans.
No, that is not true. I'm going to take a drink. In fact, it is not a common condition for most apes. Most apes do, in fact, have dark sclerae, which is the white part of your eye. It's the part, like, outside the pupil and the iris. It's the sclera. But, in fact, all species of apes, including orangutans, gorillas, chimpanzees, bonobos, and humans, can have white sclerae. Most non-human apes don't have white sclerae, but they all can. So that's just not true. And the thing is, it doesn't take a whole lot to find that out. I'm just gonna do an example. Like let's just Google image search ape eyes. See how far we have to go to find a non-human ape with white sclerae. Well, that's an AI image there, so that doesn't really. So let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. The 13th picture includes chimpanzees with white sclerae. It also includes chimpanzees with dark sclerae. So, I mean, to be fair, got both. But yeah, in the 13th picture that came up on a Google image search has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 chimpanzees with white sclerae. Actually maybe 6. That one is a little bit ambiguous because of the size of the picture. But then at least 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 with dark sclerae. Yep. It's very, very easy to find images of non-human apes with white sclerae that are not artist renditions. They're not AI. They're just photographs. It is actually a pretty common variation among modern hominids that are non-human, have white sclerae that are very noticeable. Heather Schrodinger's fossil coon for $5 says, Moreau was surgically altering animals to look more human. Okay. Yeah, so it has been a while since I've read The Island of Dr. Moreau then. Yeah, very long time apparently. Wells lived before anyone knew about genetics. Yeah, that's a good point. Okay. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, sorry about mixing up exactly what was going on the Island of Dr. Moreau. I'm trying to think, when did I read that? I think it was like at human high school I went to. So, longer ago than I want to admit is the answer to that question. Yeah. In that case, yeah, I guess his example would be his idea would be way closer to Moreau than to Victor Frankenstein. Okay.
And so when they do that, they're making it more human-like. And you'll see a bunch of other things that make them more human-like, but basically the main thing is just the look on the face. Have you ever seen an ape that had an intelligent look like this?
Yes. Ignoring the humans that I've seen that have had, get me out of here vibes on their face, all apes have very expressive faces because it's a big part of intraspecific communication, is facial expression. And they all have somewhat similar expressions. They can all look thoughtful, surprised, scared, and the facial expressions are actually not that different across all apes, including humans. The only real big difference between human facial expressions and most ape facial expressions is smiling. Most apes would interpret that as a threat or a sign of fright, and not a sign of happiness. So, that's one weird thing. But other than that, yeah, the facial expressions are not that different between most apes and humans, who are also apes. Also, Vagrant Vagabonds of Variant Vista says, I've seen dogs that have that look. What the F are you on about? Yeah, there's that too. Yeah, this is not at all an unusual or particularly human facial expression. But I'm going to take a quick break. We're going to listen to the musical stylings of one Beethoven while I grab myself a fresh, cold beer for standby for when I finish this one. And hopefully this will be a relatively short one because I won't be waiting on a guest to also get back. It'll just be me taking a quick break. And we will be right back after these messages. Okay, welcome back, everybody. For $4.99, Roshna Ooh Keller says, "Did you read The Island of Dr. Moreau, or did you just see the Treehouse of Horror segment?" I actually kind of forgot there was a Treehouse of Horror segment until you sent that. But no, I read it. But it was once, and it was a very, very long time ago. So I don't remember it very well at all. So yeah. It's also possible that when I read it, I was not carefully consuming it, and I was kind of rushing through it, but I'm not sure. I know it wasn't something that I was required to read. which probably does mean I probably paid more attention than I would have otherwise, because I hated required reading for like books. It's very few of the required reading assignments that I had in school are books that I remember fondly, which includes Catcher in the Rye, Scarlet Letter. There were actually a few books that were required reading that I didn't read and then later read and liked, but I feel like I wouldn't have liked them if I had read them when I was supposed to. Basically, if someone tells me you have to read this book or else, I'm not going to enjoy that read, no matter how good the book is, apparently. Although I still maintain that The Scarlet Letter is a vastly overrated book. Not that it doesn't have very important things to say about, like, you know, repression and the differential treatment of women versus men in patriarchal societies, and judgmentalism versus forgiveness, and like, it has all sorts of great, really cool, very important themes. However, the fact that I could read it by reading the first line of every paragraph, and if no action actually occurred, skipping to the next paragraph and still get an A, tells me that most of that book doesn't need to exist. Yeah. Anyway, Robert Carpenter says, I made the bold decision to read Atlas Shrugged for a book report. First of all, that is a long book to do for a book report in school. Second, I have not read it, but I have not heard very good things, so my condolences. Olivia Williams for $6.99 Beaverbucks says, I'm pretty excited to go see Alien Romulus after the stream. I am actually looking into showtimes for that. I'm thinking about trying to see it, like, because I take Mondays off. So, like, a Monday matinee is a really good time for me to go see a movie, because I get some of the price of the ticket off. And usually it's pretty dead theater, so there's not a whole lot of, like, jerks being loud in the theater. So yeah, I'm thinking about seeing it on Monday, because I've heard really, really good things, and I'm also trying carefully to avoid spoilers, and it's becoming more and more difficult. So, yeah. And Obstinate Sparrow says, ditto, if I'm told I have to read a book, chances are I won't read it, or I won't enjoy it if I do. Yeah. Look, maybe some people can enjoy books that they have to read for class, and to be fair, I did take a literature course in college where I enjoyed most of the books. I would like to say that I enjoyed all of them. Unfortunately, one of them was Mystic River, and it caused some trauma responses as a result of, like, my family dealing with murders in the family, or murder in the family. And that book focused far more than most of the other books on the actual details of what it's like to have a family member killed. And I was like, yeah, that's not to knock the book, but it was very difficult for me personally to get through that book. Yeah. Anyway, enough talking about that. Let's go on with Pete Greer before this gets depressing.
Did they see this animal and see that intelligent look on the face? Well, of course not. They never saw this animal.
True, but they did see other apes. So, you know, take a drink.
They found a fossil. So that's an interpretation. You see, they're interpreting those bones according to their worldview.
I mean, technically that's not incorrect, but the problem is you haven't provided any reason other than to say that you disagree with them as to why that reconstruction is wrong. Right? Like, if you want to say a reconstruction is wrong, that's great. You can say that. But you have to actually have a reason other than just that I disagree with it. Because the thing is, if I went around claiming that every bit of paleo art that I saw, that I personally didn't think was the most likely reconstruction, was wrong, I would have a very high burden of proof to demonstrate that. Because I think that most paleo reconstructions are probably inaccurate in many ways. And I don't always know what they are, but in some cases I can point to things where I'm like, this is almost certainly incorrect. But can I say it's wrong? No. No, I can't. Because I wouldn't be able to reconstruct it with anything else that wasn't speculative. And so if you're going to say that it's wrong, you're going to have to do a whole lot more than just lie about how Lucy's hip was arranged.
Oh, we have the first romance of the humankind in Lucy and her boyfriend.
Okay.
Notice no facial hair.
Most apes have less hair around the face. That's not... I'm just going to take a drink for him picking up some of these stupidest complaints. Jeez.
The nose, more human-like.
Now, that right there, I actually do think is probably a fair thing. I do think that Lucy probably did not have as prominent a schnoz as this, and that her nose was probably much more like a chimpanzee or a bonobo nose. And you can, as a proxy for this, you can use like the protrusion of the nasal bone, because the extended sort of bulbous nose that you have is cartilage, which itself anchors to the medial point on your nasal bone. And in order to help anchor all of that cartilage, it actually raises up past sort of where you would expect the skull to be if it were just sort of flat. You had sort of a flat face. And that peaked nasal bone is actually a good indication as to whether or not you had a sort of bulbous, sticky outy human type nose, or a more flat with upturned nostrils, like nose like a gorilla or a chimpanzee. And from my understanding, and reference to Australopithecus skulls, Australopithecines had skulls that were much more like a chimpanzee in terms of the nasal region than they did like a modern human. So I will actually agree that that nose is probably more human than is appropriate. So you know what? You finally got one, Pete. You finally got one. So I'll take a drink for that.
The whites of the eyes there. Oh, hi, how you doing today? I mean, it looks like he's talking to you, doesn't it? That's probably what they want you to kind of think.
I mean, it's just an ape with its mouth open. Like, that's just a thing that apes... I really, with that one, I don't know what his complaint is. Like, what... I feel like at this point, no matter what the face looks like, no matter what, he's going to complain. I really don't know.
This one's having a bad day. I'm not sure what happened, but it's not having a...
That looks like a still from like a movie, not like a museum display, but I don't actually know. So I don't even know what that's supposed to be representing.
Very good day. This one is not of Lucy's kind, but it shows you, this was on the cover of I believe...
I mean, I guess I don't know what he means by kind, but I'm pretty sure that was supposed to be an Australopithecus africanus by like John Gurche or Gurch, I'm not really sure. It's like Gurche. He's an Australian paleoanthropology art guy who makes sculptures of various hominins, and I'm pretty sure that's his Australopithecus africanus. So like it's the same genus as Lucy, Australopithecus. It's a different species, I'll grant you that. Yeah, I don't know.
It was National Geographic, and you can see vividly the whites of the eyes depicting this as a human-looking thing. That's not an ape look on the face.
It's literally just looking up. What would it be an ape look if it had dark sclerae? It's literally just looking up. Does Pete Greer think apes don't look up? Is that the conclusion I'm supposed to come to here? Is that Pete Greer thinks apes can't look up? Please, someone tag me and tell me what you think he's trying to say when he says that that's not an ape look. Because other than the color of the sclerae, which as we've already established isn't actually a problem, I don't know what he's talking about. Carrie Bronson for $5 says, if this is a continuation of the, quote, too expressive argument, see again our comparison to dogs. Yeah, well, I mean, there is that too. What is happening right now? This isn't an ape expression, or this isn't an ape look. I don't know how to make that model look more apish than it does. I mean, it's taking its cue for skin tone directly from chimpanzees. Those eyes are completely compatible with chimpanzees. If you told me that this was a chimpanzee face, other than how wide it is, I probably wouldn't have that much of a complaint. I'd be like, it's kind of a funny looking chimpanzee, but sure, I guess. The only reason I recognize it as most likely that John Gurche Australopithecus africanus reconstruction is because creationists have forced me to become familiar with hominin reconstructions that are popular in pictures. Jillian said, oh, so Roshina says, I think Pete is getting aroused. You know what? Good for him. Jillian Wren says, I think it's the expression in the eyes, which is ludicrous. Yeah, I mean, I would agree. Vagri says, the only thing I can think of is it looks kind of thoughtful. I guess. I mean, to me, that looks like as neutral a face as you could possibly imagine. Like, I don't know how to make that face look less expressive. I don't know. I am at a loss for this one. Sorry, Pete. You lost me completely. I have no idea what you're talking about.
And here we can see that they're truly advancing to being a human. He's carrying his stick around. He's got his walking stick in his hand. And the other one looks like he might be using it as a weapon. It's got a sharp end on it.
Hey, Pete, orangutans make spears for spearfishing. Orangutans spearfish. So what's your complaint here? I'm taking a drink because the fact is that Pete apparently does not know that humans are not the only apes that you make and use tools. We have a thousands of year long record of chimpanzee archaeology. Tools from thousands of years ago made not by humans, but by chimpanzees. You can be a chimp archaeologist if you want to. That is a job you could get. Current day chimpanzees and orangutans make tools. They use tools. They take objects in their environment and shape them to be better tools and then use them for things like trapping insects, stabbing other animals as spears, crushing nuts that they otherwise couldn't, or that would be hard to crush and might be injurious to their teeth. Right? Like, that's a thing other apes do now. Not in the distant past, not imagined with some kind of human ancestor, probably maybe had tools. No, right now, modern, non-human apes craft and use tools. And it's not just apes. Some birds do it too. Crows, magpies, ravens are all known to shape objects in their environment to be better tools and then to use tools. This is not a uniquely human thing. So the fact that this guy is objecting to some picture of an ape using a tool is nonsensical, because that's a thing they can do now. The non-human apes now use tools.
This one is very contemplative.
Okay, dude. Dude, you complaining about the facial expression of paleoanthropological reconstructions means literally nothing, unless you're going to tell me what you think they should look like. Because I can find you pictures of chimpanzees that have basically that expression. In fact, rather than contemplative, I would say that ape just looks high. Looks like that ape just had some really dank blood.
And on National Geographic,
that's the John Birch Homo floresiensis. And that one always makes me laugh, because it looks like she's just staring at you like, I can't believe you just did that. The nerve. I love the facial expression on that one. I say she because the model is supposed to be of a presumably female Homo floresiensis. So yeah, that's why he's the feminine there.
They talked about the hobbits, which we believe were malnourished humans that lived in caves.
Oh my god. Take a drink. Jeez. Okay. I guess technically in saying we believe, he's not wrong, because maybe that is what he believes. But that option has been completely demolished. Here's the thing. Pathological problems in fossils are something that humans can detect. Paleopathology and the study of paleopathologies is in fact a thing that happens. And you can tell the difference between a normally proportioned member of a different species and a pathologically proportioned human. Savage Vampire Pterosaur Cobra for $2 says, to the Takei, you are made of stupid. Oh, sorry. You are made of stupid. Clip. Yes. Yeah, it's a really good clip. I should have that clip handy. It's a really good one. Anyway. So, yes. The idea of, like, malnourishment, microcephaly, and other pathological explanations for Homo floresiensis have all been explored, and they have all been disregarded. because all of these things actually have diagnostic criteria. You can tell if there's a difference between pathological malnourishment and just being a normally proportioned member of a different species. And we've checked, and no, Homo floresiensis is not an example of malnourished or microcephalic humans. But Savage, Vampire, Pterosaur, Cobra gifted 5 memberships. So let's take 5 drinks. Thank you very much. Here's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Okay. So let's see what else Pete has for us.
Probably shortly after the flood, when it was hard to get good nutrition.
So hold on. They get to Flores in Indonesia shortly after the flood? Wouldn't this have to be post-Babel? And Babel was a city, which means that the surrounding environment of Babel had enough productive capacity to make a whole city, with the entire human population at the time, apparently, that was well fed enough to have excess labor available to make a tower. Now, granted, I don't believe any of this. I'm just taking a look at what does Pete think happened. So then, after the Tower of Babel, Pete thinks that one group of humans managed to get to Flores Island, an island full of jungle, surrounded by jungle islands, surrounded by, or with the main coast being Southeast Asia, which again is full of jungle, which means fruit, animals, vegetables, all over the place. And so his conclusion is these humans somehow made it to Flores right after the Tower of Babel, but the Earth was still under such heavy effects of a flood, they couldn't find food, and so they were malnourished. But there was a whole population of them that were malnourished, because we have a whole population found in that cave in Flores. Okay, but that also, before that, earlier, when the Earth would have been more affected by the flood, those same humans could build a city that could build a tower so big that it made God scared, according to the text. I don't know how to square those ideas. That sounds internally contradictory. That sounds like nonsense. That sounds like something you made up to cope. So, yeah. Jeez.
And so it's called the Lost World, the Little People, but they of course tried to make them, part of the lineage from the animals to the humans.
What does that mean? First of all, no one has ever suggested that Homo floresiensis is ancestral to Homo sapiens at all. I mean, for one thing, they overlapped temporally with Homo sapiens for quite a while, meaning that they were not ancestral to Homo sapiens. They got to Flores probably before Homo sapiens ever evolved in the first place. And, yeah, they're hominins, I guess. Well, no, not I guess. They definitely are hominins. But they're not part of the ancestry of Homo sapiens. They're a different group of hominins. Savage Vampire Pterosaur Cobra for $2 says, jungles, famously devoid of vegetation, right? Yeah. Yeah, you definitely can't feed yourself in a jungle. But also, from animals to humans, that's literally any... Look, first, humans are animals, right? Humans are multicellular eukaryotes without cell walls who hold their tissues together with collagen. They are heterotrophs. They are animals. Every characteristic that you could find that unites squid and box jellies and jellyfish and sponges and cows and fish and snakes and sparrows together as one group of organisms, the animals, is also going to include humans. You cannot come up with a collection of features that all of those organisms have and that group them together that does not also include features that humans have and therefore put them in the same group. So, no matter what hominin we find, no matter how closely related it is to humans, no matter how distantly related to humans it is, no matter how wrong scientists get it, no matter how right they get it, it will be an animal. And that in no way detracts or adds to its position as part of the human ancestral story. All human ancestors until the first animal were animals, and modern humans are animals. Now, if you want to maintain some kind of ethical distinction between humans and brute animals, fine. Go ahead. I don't care. As long as you're not going to then use it as an excuse to be needlessly cruel to animals. But you have to recognize that that is not a biological distinction. There is no biological distinction between humans and other animals. A moral, ethical, spiritual distinction? Go nuts. I don't care. It's not a biological distinction.
So once again, we see a bunch of illusion here. People, artist drawings, museums' interpretations of what these bones that they found might look like.
Okay, but Pete, it was your choice to concentrate on those things. You could have dug into the actual papers describing these organisms and going through the measurements of their bones and whatnot, but you chose not to. You don't get to complain about all they have is artist impressions when you're the one who chose to focus on artist impressions and not on the actual bones that were found. That's a you problem, buddy. April Van Ryan, who's been a member for 17 months, says, impressed that they built a mud brick tower big enough to anger God when we use iron and concrete, and God hasn't bothered ours, with a Godzilla emoji, which, yeah, take a drink. And actually, AIG keeps saying that they're going to make a replica Tower of Babel, and I love that. Here's why, right? Because it's a lose-lose proposition. Either they build another Tower of Babel, and God confuses their languages, which then ruins AIG, apparently, because that's what happens when God confuses your language. You all have to scatter, right? So either it's disaster for Answers in Genesis, because it shows that, well, I guess it shows that the story is true, but it also means that all their languages are confused, and now they all start speaking new, presumably heretofore unknown languages, which would be a big pain. Or they build a replica Tower of Babel, and God doesn't care, which seems to indicate that the original story is probably not literally true. Or, of course, there is no God to, but fiddle with their languages. But either way, if there's no confusion of their languages, it seems like prima facie evidence that the story just isn't true. So, yeah, I consider this a lose-lose proposition for them, which means it's win-win for me. Spending a lot of money to show that the Bible isn't true on that, at least literally in this aspect. Cool. You guys go for it. Have fun.
And you can see their interpretations exhibiting themselves in these museums.
Their interpretations exhibiting themselves. Pete, interpretations aren't agents that can actively participate in anything. You could say you can see them exhibiting their interpretations in museums, them being the scientists. That's an option you could go with. The interpretations themselves have no volition. They don't physically exist. They're not active entities. So, yeah. Just a bit of grammatical correction there.
So, I doubt if this is going to come out well on YouTube, but you can go to Mighty Optical Illusions on Google Images and find these neat optical illusions that maybe the people here, I don't have the room darkened because of the filming, but when the room's dark, you can kind of see a lot of motion here in this diagram.
I can't see any motion. However, it is a diagram where you're supposed to feel like it's a spiral, even though it's actually concentric circles. But also, Pete, my guy, I know you're probably not going to watch this, and that's okay. But if you do, the reason this isn't coming out well is because you're peaking or clipping both the audio and the video. Change your exposure and figure out why it is you can't use a lapel mic. Because I know you're wearing one. I can see it. So, yeah, the reason it's not coming out on YouTube is not because of, like, YouTube compression or something like that. It's because whoever is recording this doesn't know how to record audio or video. So, yeah.
So here's some more indoctrination for you. How special are human genes? Some of us think that we have a special place, but the human genome is similar to a chimpanzee's.
I mean, that's true. I would still say that doesn't mean that humans aren't special. because the ways in which the human genome differ from those of chimpanzees are, a big part of the reason that humans aren't chimpanzees. And I do think humans are special. But then again, I think all species are special. I don't know what the point he's trying to make here is.
It has a lot in common with the genome of a fruit fly.
Also true.
So there you are. And we're 50% similar to bananas, by the way.
So I hear that, but I haven't actually been able to find a source. Now, I know Erica from Guts of Gibbon looked into it, and what she found was more like 30%, but with certain regions that were highly conserved across all eukaryotes being higher than that. But also, I don't know why I'm supposed to care what the exact number is for like similarity between a human and a banana, which is also going to be basically the same as between a human and any other plant. April Van Ryan says, it's too late for him to learn how to make a video now, but it might not be too late for his videographer, right? Like his videographer, for all I know, was like a 14-year-old kid who could actually make great improvements and could become like a great cinematographer. It's possible. Rosa Maka Maka for $4.99 says, hello from Scottsdale, surviving this 100-degree and hell degrees summer thanks to your videos. Thanks for the indoor entertainment. Well, thank you very much. It's been a while since I've been to Scottsdale, a few years. But hey, it's always nice to have another fellow Arizonan. Right now, it's only 99 here, according to my computer's temperature gauge, which is not as accurate normally as my phone's. Let's check the phone, see what temperature it is here. And these are freedom units for everybody who is wondering. Let's see. Well, that says 100, but that was like an hour and a half ago. 102, according to my phone, which is, obviously freedom units. But I guess if you really want to know the temperature in communism units, it's almost 39. Savage Blueberry Chromosome Crumble Cobra says the balls on a younger creation is complaining about indoctrination, right? Seriously. Yeah, can't disagree there.
So here's
okay, those are embryology drawings. I know you probably can't see them, but that's what's going on.
a few things from the textbooks in the 90s. I think I have one in here from the early 2000s that clearly have presented as a fact things we've known to be untrue now for decades.
That embryos develop in similar ways across tetrapoda? Nope, that's not a false. What specifically is being presented that's not true? I'm curious.
Once we started going inside the womb and photographing embryos, we know that we do not go through the cycle of all the early animals.
True, I guess. I'll take a drink. It is true, the recapitulation theory as proposed by Ernst Haeckel, where like you go through the adult stages of your evolutionary ancestry in embryo, that's not true. That's not a thing that happens. But that's also not what's being displayed here. What's being displayed here is the Ernst von Mayr actual laws of embryology that have not been disproven, in which, all these tetrapods start out being virtually identical, and then they start to diverge from one another in a way that actually mirrors the evolutionary ancestry, wherein turtle diverges earlier than, say, the pig and the human. And I think it's actually a bird in the middle where we can't see it. But, like, so what specifically, Pete, I want you to specifically point to something on one of these embryo drawings that you think is wrong. Right? Like, oh, that's not where the eye is on that, what I'm going to just presume is a chicken embryo. Or like, nope, I'm sorry, but there just aren't pharyngeal arches on a turtle embryo. Like, what specifically about this diagram is wrong? Because, granted, it's not photographs, but, like, from what I can see through the clipping, nothing here looks inaccurate. Now, if you want to say, well, we should use photographs instead of drawings, I mean, okay, I guess. I don't really care.
We know that the gill slits have nothing, what they call gill slits, have nothing to do with respiration in humans. They become parts of the middle ear, they become glands in this part of the head.
Okay, I'm going to take a drink, because that is one of the more hilarious points, because of just how strongly these pharyngeal arches, which he's calling gill slits, actually do indicate deep homology within the vertebrate lineages. So here's a drink of beer. Cheers. That was a very stupid thing for you to say. And here's why. Gill slits in fish, or pharyngeal arches to be more proper, not even they all turn into gills. In fact, a number of them turn into jaw bones. And we can see the evolution of jaws from gill arches in fish in the fossil record. You can watch the evolution of gill arches into hinges that can close around the mouth, forming a lower jaw. Further, those bones that you're complaining about as being part of the middle ear rather than part of, say, respiration, middle ear bones in mammals start at the jaw because they are in fact homologous to reptile and amphibian jaw bones. And going through the synapsid fossil record, the mammal-like reptile, to use an older term, fossil record, you can see those bones, which in all tetrapods, by the way, are involved in picking up vibrations, aka sound, migrating from the jaw to the inner ear. And in the embryonic development of mammals, you can see that same development. In embryo, they start by the jaw. And the jaw was, again, what? Derived from gill arches, as we can see in the fossil record. And so the idea that this is somehow some kind of knock against evolution, when in fact it aligns not just in terms of embryology, but also the embryology aligns with the fossil record, is a huge win for evolution. There is no reason to expect these fossils to line up so exactly with the embryonic development as to make all of that work out so neatly. And further, when it comes to breathing, hey, news alert, your lungs develop from the tube that goes from, your mouth to your anus embryologically as an outgrowth of the digestive system. And in fact, modern fish that don't have lungs can gulp air into their stomachs in order to further oxygenate their bloodstream when they're in low oxygen water. It's actually a pretty common behavior. And we also know that the swim bladder of most teleost fish starts out embryonically the same way that lungs start out, because the swim bladder is actually a vestigial lung that's been repurposed for buoyancy control. Because lungs containing air are already capable of buoyancy control to some extent, and they just stopped being used for oxygen intake and started being used for that. And further, there are lung fish, which develop their lungs the same way you do as part of the digestive system. So, yeah, of course your lungs don't have anything to do with the pharyngeal arches, because those are two different methods of basically pulling oxygen out of the environment. And you no longer use one of them, and fish still use one of them, and most of them no longer use the one you use, but there are also fish that do both still. You have to try to be this bad at science. I feel like Pete has to try to be this dumb. Ugh. Yeah, as Vagary says, Pete, your model can't explain effing anything about how animals work.
Have nothing to do with respiration, and yet they call them gill slits.
Okay, look, if you want to argue that they should call them all pharyngeal arches, I'm with you. Right? Because they're not slits, and they don't turn into gills in humans or other tetrapods, right? So sure, if that's your complaint, if you're like, I don't like they call them gill slits, okay, great. I'm with you on that. But the problem is that just changing their name to pharyngeal arches doesn't remove the amazing congruity between their embryological use and development and their development of those same structures in the fossil record in ways that match their embryonic development. Right? You can't just wish that away. You have to come up with an explanation for that. The only explanation that I've heard that isn't just a post hoc rationalization, where basically you just rely on the omnipotence of God to hand wave away any problem, the only explanation I found is evolution.
Very misleading.
Just drink.
The last sentence says, these similarities among vertebrate embryos, they look at what they do have in common, suggest that there's a common ancestor.
Which is true.
For all the vertebrates. If you're coming from an evolutionary point of view, yes, it would suggest that. But I come from a biblical point of view that shows that they have a common designer.
Okay, but there's no reason why a common designer who wants you to have 3 middle ear bones would have two of them start in your jaw as an embryo, only to migrate into your ear. Why does that happen? In fact, marsupials are born with those those middle ear bones in their jaws, and they only migrate into the ear after birth. Now, that's because when they're born, marsupials are much, much earlier in development than, say, placental mammals. But, like, Pete, why does that happen? There's no good reason other than evolution why your middle ear bones shouldn't just develop in the ear from the start. Instead, they start in your jaw. Why? Why, Pete? What is the creationist explanation for this that isn't just, I guess God just did it that way? Because I can tell you what, there's a really good evolutionary reason that corresponds to both embryology and the fossil record, going all the way back into the Cambrian, that explains this. What's the creationist explanation? Because near as I can tell, it's just like, I don't know, I guess God just did it that way. Which is an explanation that can explain literally anything, which means it's also an explanation that explains nothing. Any explanation that can explain literally anything actually explains nothing.
So Haeckel's lie was he just took out a bunch of the organs to make them look similar.
I hate this. I'm going to take another drink. Haeckel didn't just take out a bunch of organs. Specifically, Haeckel removed yolk and maternal tissue. That's it. Yolk and maternal tissue. Why did he do this? Because neither of those are properly part of the developing fetus, and what he wanted to compare was just the embryonic structures of the organisms that would result in adult structures or be resorbed by the embryo. Not maternal tissue that was simply supportive of the embryo as it developed. That is not an inappropriate thing to do. In fact, if you want to compare embryological development in terms of just the embryo and what it itself does as it grows, then the maternal tissue is irrelevant and is only a distraction. And in fact, in the paper that originally accused Haeckel of fraud, one of the mistakes that they made, and then later admitted to in their retraction of the original paper, was that they did not remove maternal tissue and yolk tissue, which resulted in photographs that were more dissimilar than was appropriate. And when they later published their second paper, Haeckel, fraud not proven, and they did remove those, and also oriented and scaled the embryos to be roughly the same scale and oriented the same way, they found out that, oh, actually, these embryos do look about as much like each other as Haeckel said they did. Yep. So, yeah. I'm gonna hit play.
Our embryos with the other animals. And then he admitted that he did it. He's the guy who said, I have to believe in spontaneous evolution, because if I don't believe in spontaneous evolution, this was before evolutionary thinking became the norm. He says, if I don't believe in spontaneous generation, then I have to believe in that God thing. You know, I can't let a divine foot in the door, is what he said.
Okay, I don't care. I literally couldn't possibly care less what the motive was for some scientists from the 19th century to do something. It doesn't matter to me. It doesn't affect the truth or the falsity of any of their ideas. It doesn't affect modern science one bit. If we could find out beyond any shadow of a doubt that the reason that Darwin came up with evolution was, one, because he hated God, and two, because he wanted to give fuel to a future ideology of social Darwinism resulting in genocides around the world, and that he was actually the world's most evil man, none of that matters. It doesn't actually change the scientific conclusions one bit. Look, Darwin could have been like the world's top baby eater. Doesn't matter at all. Now, granted, I think that might be a good reason to remove his statue from the British Museum of Natural History. Okay, fair enough, maybe. But it doesn't actually change anything about the science of evolutionary biology. The motives of scientists are irrelevant. To their science, at least. Doesn't necessarily mean they're irrelevant to them as people or to how you should treat their memory, but it is irrelevant to the science. April Van Ryan said, that's not true. Answers that explain everything actually explain the desperate nature of people to understand things that they aren't equipped to understand. It's fascinating, really. All right, that's a fair point. All right, here we go. A little bit more,
And so he believed in a theory that had been conclusively disproved, even though it had been conclusively disproved. That's what...
Which one? Because recapitulation was never a theory. It was only ever a hypothesis. It was Haeckel's hypothesis, and it hadn't been disproved when he was drawing his embryos. Evolution, I don't even think really rose to the level of a theory at the time, but it certainly hadn't been disproven.
It didn't happen, but he did it.
Bakery says, I mean, is it? It's a British museum. Look, the fact that the British Museum, or the British museums generally, have a whole lot of, put it mildly, iffy stuff going on, doesn't mean that they should. So, there you go.
Admit that he just made this up. When we started photographing these embryos and we realized the way that they were, these should have been taken out of the textbooks.
Those aren't even Haeckel's drawings. Do you notice he doesn't actually point to any specific structure of the embryo in these drawings and says that's wrong? Right? Like, if these are inaccurate drawings that are giving you the wrong impression, tell me what about them is wrong. Are those post-anal tails incorrect? Is the eye position wrong? Do the pharyngeal arches not actually occur? Are the limb buds in the wrong place, or are there the wrong number of limb buds? Tell me what specifically you think is wrong about this drawing of an embryo that a photograph would correct. Because otherwise, you're just whining about the fact that embryology provides evidence for evolution, and you don't like that fact. Well, okay, you don't have to, but that doesn't make it wrong. Your distaste for embryology and having it in textbook, which is all I can detect, doesn't mean a damn thing for whether or not embryology is good evidence of evolution.
And they weren't. And that now we're looking at a human tail. Okay, they say we have a human tail.
Yes, a tail is a portion of the spine that extends posterior to the anus. In embryo, humans have a portion of the tail that extends posterior to the anus. Therefore, embryonic humans, at least for a time, have a tail.
No. We know it as a fact that tail is, in fact, our spinal column, and that our body catches up to it. So,
okay, hold up. We know for a fact that tail is part of our spinal column. Pete, what do you think? What do you think tails are? What do you think the bones are in your cat or dog's tail? What is that, Pete? What? I have to. I'm going to finish this drink and pour another beer. I can't. What? Pete, what? I'm at a loss for words. That's not a tail. It's the spinal column. Yeah, man. That's what a tail is, my guy. It's the part of the spinal column that's after the anus, which is what that is. And yeah, granted, your body will catch up to it because it stops growing and the rest of you doesn't. But that doesn't make it part of the spinal column that comes posterior to the anus, which is literally what a tail is. I don't... Someone please make this make sense. What is... Oh my god. That's not a skull. It's just a collection of dermal bones surrounding your brain at the anterior portion of your spine. Yeah, I guess. Technically, in that sense, maybe humans don't have skulls either. Jeez.
it doesn't look like a tail anymore.
Yeah, anymore. But what was it before that, Pete? What was it before it stopped being a tail? Oh my god. I was not expecting it to get that dumb. That might be a new record for Pete on how dumb he can be. Carrie Bronson for $5 says, insert highly inappropriate suggestion as to how he thinks tails attached to bodies. I am honestly stunned. I had no idea that was even a thing that a human would possibly say.
It's not a vestigial tail. It's only a spinal column.
Pete, Please. Please tell me you don't... You do know that tails are parts of the spinal column. What else do you think they are? Have you never seen the skeleton of a dog or a cat or any other animal with a tail? A lizard skeleton? A snake skeleton? A dinosaur skeleton? Have you never seen a skeleton of any animal that has a tail in your entire life, Pete? What kind of bones are in the tail, Pete? They're caudal vertebrae. Why do we call them vertebrae? Oh, because they're part of the vertebral column, aka the spine. I'm taking another drink. This is gonna make me lose my brain. My brain's just gonna leak out. I'm not gonna have a brain anymore, everybody. That's it. Last Dapper Dinosaur video. After this, I'm just gonna be a gibbering idiot. Alright, we're gonna get like one more bit of Pete in, and I'm gonna have to wrap things up because I might explode.
So to try to say that we came from animals because we have a tail is just a complete lie that's still in the textbooks today.
Which part is the lie, Pete? Because it's definitely a tail, and humans are definitely animals, which means they came from animals. Hey, guys, if you're a human, you had parents. Those parents were animals. So you came from animals because humans are animals. Okay, we're going to start wrapping things up a little bit early. Not a whole lot early, just a little bit early. Wow. That was... Whew, that was a lot worse than I was expecting. And, I'm not sure I should have done that on my own. Probably should have had a guest for that. Because holy crap, would at least someone else be able to experience the pain and with me right here on air? Jeez, that's something else. I'll say that. All right, so what is coming up on the channel in the next few days? So on the Tuesday at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern, we're going to be doing Kent with Bent. I already have a thumbnail for it. I don't think I have it scheduled, but it's going to be there. So, yep, that's going to be Kent with Bent. Then on Thursday, let's see. Yes. Do the Hawaiian Islands disprove the old Earth? We're going to be taking a look at Timothy Clary talking about... Not Timothy Clary, sorry. That's who would make sense for them to have. But instead they actually had on Jeffrey Tompkins, a geneticist, to talk about erosion for some frickin' reason. And so he is going to argue that the erosion rate of the Hawaiian Islands somehow disproves an old Earth. You might be wondering how that could even logically follow. And you would be right to wonder that, because it doesn't. It doesn't at all. At best, that could argue that the Hawaiian Islands are young, which, relatively speaking, they are. But yeah, it's going to be a pretty crazy one. I really liked how that one came out, so hopefully you do too. Savage Blueberry Chromosome Cobra for $5 says, it's not a jaw. It just has some bone with teeth that moves around to process food. Exactly. Okay, so that is Thursday at noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern is the Do the Hawaiian Islands Disprove an Old Earth, where Jeffrey Tompkins, the geneticist, is going to try and tell us about geology. Because why would they have the geologist on to talk about that? Then on Saturday, we're going to be continuing on with the Pete Greer thing. This video is 1 hour, 18 minutes, and 30 seconds long, and we've only been through 28 minutes and 9 seconds of it. So we've got a while to go. I do not know if I will have a guest. I believe that Vishanti will be back from her trip by then, and if so, I will be inviting her. So I think there's probably a better than even chance Vishanti will be back for Saturday, but I cannot promise it. For those of you who are interested, over on the Discord server for patrons and channel members, which if you're not one of those, feel free to join, we will be watching Power Rangers Operation Overdrive. I believe it's episodes 8, 9, 10, and 11. No, sorry. 9, 10, 11, and 12 is the episodes we're going to be watching. So if you want to hang out, or if you, for some unfathomable reason, think that Power Rangers Operation Overdrive is a really great show, hey, head over there. We're going to have fun. I'm going to finish up this beer that I poured. And yeah, it's going to be a good time, I think. Other than that, thank you so much, everybody. You've been extremely generous. There are links in the description to Patreon. There's a merch store below this video. You can join the channel if you want to. All of those get you cool perks. There's also a wish list for both me and Benthoven linked in the description, as well as Bent's Patreon in the description. So if you are feeling generous and you can afford it, feel free to check those things out. Otherwise, I'm going to get out of here and go hop over to my Discord in just a few minutes, and I will catch all of you guys Tuesday. Hey, before you leave, I just want to take a second to thank my patrons and channel members, especially those pledging $20 or above. Benthoven, Tapioca Weasel, Whispers, Ella Runteller, Horseflesh, Ian Chen, Kelvin Brostock Van Manen, Landon Knoll, Mabdy Babdy, Volis, John Ackerman, and Strawberry Vein. It's because of my channel members and patrons whom you're seeing on screen that this channel can stay afloat. Without you, it would all shut down. If you want to join the team, there's a link to join the channel below this video, and there's a link to join the Patreon in the description. On the Patreon, you can get a 10% discount for pledging annually, and either way, you get early access to virtually all of my scripted videos, often 3 to 5 months before they come out for the general public. Thanks for watching.